Welcome to Real Estate of Mind, a Farming Group podcast. Welcome to another edition of Real Estate of Mind. I'm Andy Gutman, and I have the good fortune today to be here with the Executive Director of Midtown Detroit, Inc. Most of you, like me, probably don't know her by that title, also known as the Mayor of Midtown. I'm here with the wonderful Sue Mosey. Hello, Sue.
Hi, how are you?
Great, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So, Sue, a lot of people know what you're doing in Midtown today and all the great things, but what people may not know is how you got started in your career, what brought you to Midtown Detroit, and all the great things you're doing as the mayor. So if you wouldn't mind, can you give us a little background on your history in Detroit?
Sure. So I've been working in Midtown now for 30 years.
Wow.
And I'm from Detroit. I went to Wayne State University. So, and I got my master's in urban planning there. But I always felt that this particular part of the city was really underleveraged. When I went to school there were a tremendous amount of vacant buildings and very devolved, sort of commercial and residential market going on. And but there always was vitality because we had the museums and we had the university. You always had major health care. So you had employment, a good, strong employment and student base. But what you didn't have was all the other amenities and the other sort of infrastructure that was needed to really, create this as a really unique neighborhood.
And so, so you were down at Wayne State. And did you go right from Wayne State University to working?
No, actually I had a couple of other jobs. I worked for a neighborhood organization in Southwest Detroit early on, right when I got out of school. I worked for a downtown development authority for a while.
Oh, really?
For over 30 years now, I've been working here in this neighborhood. And, really started early on when the organization was very small. There was only a couple of us working there. We were really trying to figure out what are some very strategic activities we could engage in that would have sort of wide-ranging impacts, but with not a lot of money.
Right.
So we did a couple of things right off the bat. We put together a pre-development loan fund, which was very, very patient, which was willing to take a gamble on a lot of startup developers. The kinds of folks that, were from the local neighborhood or went to the university and had graduated were now either in construction or, wannabe developers and just preservationists. And we started out with a whole cadre of these folks. And clearly they couldn't get access to capital. And so we had Hudson Weber Foundation. We worked with them to design a unique program and got that funded. It took us a year to get an IRS ruling that would allow us to be able to have a program like that actually where you could give these really soft loans to for-profit developers. And if you were in partnerships with the nonprofits, you could also participate in that program. And as long as you were creating jobs and had a mix of housing types and affordability levels, we were able to get that done. So that's really how a lot of the projects have been seeded, and over about 50 people now have used that program over the years.
That's fantastic. And it seems like you've always found a way with development opportunities. It may be patient money that you find, but if there's a development that makes sense to do and is good for the area, you seem to have always found some way to help them get funding, to help the project get off the ground, and really seem to push hard to make sure that those developments that make sense to get done. It seems like that takes a lot of, let's call it moxie. It takes persistence. Are there other ideas like that you've used, different
Yeah,
ways?
I think one of the things that we're probably known as being really good at is connecting people with all kinds of things. So we can connect you with financing, we connect you with sites, we connect you with tenants, we connect you with technical assistants, we help you build development teams that know what they're doing. So we're pretty much the true one-stop shop. And if you come in and you see us, and whether you're a startup developer or you're somebody who's a very mature developer that's in lots of other markets, you're going to get the same sort of service from us. I mean, we're going to be just as excited no matter where you are in the spectrum of your development aspiration. As long as you really want to bring value, you're really seriously investing, you really have sort of the collective vision, and you respect that in terms of what you're trying to do in the neighborhood, then we will, typically become very engaged with your group in an attempt to, find a location that can really work, and then figure it a way so you understand on the front end too, really understanding the market here, understanding the challenges right up front, understanding kind of the players, the processes, because you really need to sort of be able to assess all that on the front end of your project.
Oh, absolutely. And you do seem to give a lot of guidance to different groups wherever they are in the process. Mm-hmm. And I want to tell our listeners a quick story. I had the good fortune to go to lunch with you a few weeks back. Mm-hmm. And this is what I think makes you such a great part of our community. Is our waitress came up. Do you remember this? During lunch, and started to talk to you about her new opportunity that she's got. She's got her own business she's trying to start up, and it's clear she's in the introductory stages of that. But you took the time to talk to her about that, and you clearly are working to help her get off the ground, even though it may take her some time. She's she's working to save up money clearly to help her business. But it doesn't matter what end of the spectrum people are at in their development or in their business. You are all about really helping them to get started and staying on track. So I would imagine when she's ready, you're right there for her.
Yeah, we love to work with all the creative entrepreneurs in the city. And that's what really adds really unique, a unique vibe to your district. And this is happening all over the city at this point. Sure. It's especially now out into some of the neighborhoods, which is really great to see because there's lower barrier to entry in terms of some of the costs for rent or for purchase of properties. And so because there's so many people in this generation that are really aspiring to own their own businesses, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's like manufacturing to retail, whether it's food processing to restaurant, whatever the combinations are that everyone's doing today. That's a really great thing to get behind for pretty much any of us who are in district development. But along with that, you have to have your anchor businesses, and you have to have folks that can really be the attractors in these districts. And so we're always trying to sort of balance, like, who are these folks that can come in and we know have got a brand and we know are going to bring in excitement and folks not just from the city but also from some of our suburban communities, which is critical to getting really enough 7-day a week disposable income going in terms of spending in the neighborhood. So but we always remain really committed to the local startups. And we have really witnessed how they've done so much better when there's some of the bigger players that are also coming into the neighborhood. So it's one of those things where I think we're constantly trying to navigate out here in the neighborhood. How can we sort of take care of what students are looking for, take care of what employment base, because we have 50,000 employees between New Center and Midtown, so we have a big employment base that we need to satisfy. And then you have residents, and we have all spectrums of income levels in that neighborhood, so you have to try and be working a lot of different kinds of retailers and price points, and so it's fairly complex.
Oh, without a doubt. But it's nice that you know the complexities and continue to work to navigate those. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that there's a creative class that seems to be burgeoning in the city of Detroit, and I really think that the downturn that we had, the last one, was so difficult for those coming out of school or those thinking about going into school. There were no jobs available when they came out. And I think what it did is it turned so many people into entrepreneurs. When there's no jobs, you create your job. And I think that's had an incredible effect, especially on the millennials, to really think entrepreneurially instead of what's my next job, who do I work for next. And I think that's been good, and you can see it thriving in some of the startups and some of the existing companies.
Yeah, it's a whole different kind of energy.
Yeah.
And I think there's besides, like you say, people sort of rethinking
Right.
like how they're living. As we all know, millennials are much more social. They want to be much more connected. They care about a lot of things, and they're interested in cities and how they work and how to improve them. And so that's all working in the benefit of urban areas everywhere. And I think a couple of other things, like there's been a tremendous amount of funding support that's put in place to aspiring entrepreneurs in the city of Detroit. So many foundations have stepped up big to fund these kinds of efforts, and the city has stepped up with a couple of their major programs. So you're really seeing that start to really scale in terms of the amount of these enterprises everywhere. And again, not just the greater downtown anymore. You're seeing it finally scale up to neighborhoods, and which is ultimately where this all needs to go for the city of Detroit. So I think, and then just a ton of different financing sources too that are available today that really were never available. I mean, in the old days it was like, okay, I'm going to try to get an SBA loan.
Right.
I mean, today, yeah, SBA still has some good products, but there are a million other products. There's a million other incubator spaces. I mean, just in Midtown, between the Green Garage space, which is hosts about, I think, that 41 small businesses in there, and Tech Town's completely full, and they have
That's
a
amazing.
very active incubator and co-working space. I mean, all the co-working is filled, all the incubator spaces are full. Granted, those are relatively new models, and they've caught on pretty quickly.
Right.
And nobody knows really probably how long of a life all of these new models, but they're certainly going to be going on for quite some time, and maybe as long as millennials are the predominant demographic, which is going to be an even greater number over the next 20 years. So it is making a huge difference, I think, in just even when it comes to real estate.
Right.
I mean, years ago, nobody would be sitting around thinking one of their anchors of the real estate deal was going to be like a co-working space.
Right.
I mean,
so true.
like now today, like everybody thinks about how are we going to accommodate all these new lifestyles,
Right.
and the different ways that people are working today. And just think about the changes in all of the people that are doing all of this small batch manufacturing now in major industries, whether it's garments or whether it's food or distilleries, or I mean, there's just a ton of new activity like that is really creating jobs, and it's really taking up space, and it's creating spin-offs, and it's providing new retail opportunities. So I mean, it's really a game changer.
It is. It's an amazing pivot that we never thought we'd see, but it's changing our industry incredibly.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. All right, Sue, let's get to the exciting stuff, because there are so many things going on in Midtown, and I know that our listeners would love to hear about all the projects you have going. There's probably not time enough to talk to you about all the projects, because it's an amazing list of them right now, but maybe you can hit some of the highlights that you think have a great effect on Midtown right now.
Sure. Housing, we always believe that, almost all good things come from housing. And so we're always pushing residential. So recently, I know, I remember last weekend in John Gallagher's article, he was like, well, how deep is the housing market? So we monitor pretty carefully how much absorption is going on in these new products. I think we have 5 buildings that are currently leasing that have recently been built or are in the stages of being built but are pre-leasing. And about 25 units in each are absorbed each month.
Wow.
And we feel like that's a pretty good pace. So we check the waiting list for the properties. We just did a project on Alexandria near Woodward, a very large conversion of an old historic hotel for residential. For our market rate units in that building, we have 200 people on the waiting list. There's other buildings that have 400 people on the waiting list.
Wow.
That's not uncommon. For the better buildings in the neighborhood or the newly constructed, newly renovated properties, they always have hundreds of people on the waiting list. So, as long as we have robust waiting lists, as long as we are seeing our occupancy staying at the 98%, which is what they are today.
That's incredible.
And for my first probably 20 years to 25 years there, it always was we never had bad occupancies there because there was always the students and whatever, but it was 90, 92. Now, we're at 98%. Downtown is the same. Probably all the core districts are experiencing a serious shortage of housing for not just millennials, but millennials' parents who are now all starting to come back to the city too. That's why I think they're really critical. So a couple of really good ones that we're excited about. The Plaza, which used to be known as the Hammer and Nail Building, which is where the Carpenters Union had bought the building years ago and had their offices on the upper floors. Now it's being converted to beautiful housing. It's one of our only mini high-rise buildings on Woodward. It's actually a great example of period architecture, and we're really excited that those units are going to come online before too long. I think there'll be a big market for those.
It's a beautiful building.
It's a beautiful, it's a funny thing is there's two buildings in the area that you either love or you hate, right? And one of those has always been this building. Now it was devolved kind of to a Class C medical office building, right? Well, it wasn't a lot to love when it was that. But there always was a lot of people who really appreciated that building for its character, right? And its period architecture. So we are thrilled when the decision was made not to knock that down, but to actually embellish this building and really embrace it for what it is, which a lot of us have been big fans of. There's a couple of other buildings that I think are really interesting in the neighborhood. Or structures. So for all of you Wayne State people, you remember that crazy kind of mushroom structure that was on Cass Avenue, right? Still, a portion of it is still there on the section that's privately owned, and we're working with the owner of that building now to do a really cool update on that facade, but to embrace that structure as well. And again, that's one of those things where 50% of the people say, I hate that. People say, oh, you can't take that down. It's part of the neighborhood. It's been there since the 60s. So, and then there's another very interesting building that's over in the Milwaukee Junction, which is one of our sort of adjacent neighborhoods we also work in. And it was an old 1950s glorious Chinese restaurant building. And we're currently working to have that listed so that it can be protected and redeveloped into something really funky cool over there. So there are many buildings that I feel very fondly about in the neighborhood. We've saved a lot of buildings over the years, our organization, in terms of just intervening when the owners had pretty much decided maybe there's no purpose for these buildings. And we always recognize the owners have to be compensated for that. We're not asking the owners to you don't have a use for it. We're not asking you to go do it. But we have been successful in parlaying and getting folks to sell to other quality developers. It's sort of been a win-win. The university's done that numerous times. That has really resulted in a much more vibrant adjacent neighborhood for them. We recently partnered on the Forest Arms, which is a glorious historic renovation right off the campus. Again, we did actually added 6 units on the penthouse units on the top of that building. It had experienced a terrible fire years ago, so we completely reconstructed it. It's a very important building because almost everybody knew somebody who lived there. It was 100 years old. So we're thrilled about that project coming back online, and it's fully, that leased up in a matter of 2 months or something. It's fully occupied. People really, really are enjoying the opportunity to live in that building again. So that's another example of just one that we're really excited about re-entering the market. And then we're also partnering on just some basic, really nice small townhomes. We're doing a project 58 units right now. They'll be coming online by the end of the year. And then the one recently announced that we were very involved in, remain involved in, is the new announcement of the new West Elm Hotel. That's going to be coming with a marketplace to Midtown. So that's going to be at the corner of Cass and Canfield on a big Wayne State site. It's part of a broader, larger development that's going to be done there. Then it'll also have 300 units of housing and additional retail space. That's a game changer.
It is. That's fantastic.
This is a launch of West Elm has not been in the hotel business. They are owned by Williams-Sonoma, which is a very robust company. They are cutting edge on furniture and lifestyle brand. So we're really excited that they have decided that Detroit was going to be in their first launch and one of their top priority cities to actually establish this new boutique product. So that's an example of another type of activity that we think is really going to continue to generate and fuel sort of the market there.
Right.
And then, of course, the rail line. So, in spring, hopefully, God willing, the testing will be open. And, it's always going to take a while for all the kinks to be worked out. But,
of course,
long term, we're already seeing a definite positive uptick in development interest and excitement genuinely along the rail line. So, now that we're finally getting sort of to the end, now it's sort of the cleanup time, going back and restoring a bunch of stuff along the rail that kind of got damaged and ruined, and sort of, reconstructing part of that. But we're really glad that's not long now from being operational in the neighborhood. So we'll see what other interesting new opportunities that brings.
Yeah, that is an exciting part of it. I know we've all been waiting anxiously, and it's an incredible venture to get that done. That's not an easy thing to do, especially in the Motor City.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things you mentioned with Williams-Sonoma coming back, what we're seeing a lot of in and around not only Detroit but the suburbs is companies that historically have not ventured back here and don't want to be a part of it, and they're now finding intrigue in the city of Detroit there.
Yeah, there's many. We're working with quite a few national boutiques that all your listeners would be very familiar with, that typically go into suburban big box locations that have developed these urban platform projects, and they may be around a certain segment of market. They may be kind of what they do in the burbs but smaller. They all have kind of different concepts going. But everybody sees where people are headed, and it's back to cities worldwide, and everybody tracks the demographics, and we all know that it's only going to continue to be more millennial, not less. And so clearly, and many of these retailers have maxed out store locations in the obvious, locations where they've traditionally gone. So, but I do sense that it's not just people wanting to come back into these urban centers, and especially for a city like Detroit, but it's actually people are passionate about it.
It seems
like it's more than just a transactional decision. It's partially a brand decision.
Right.
It's partially, I think folks who really have some appreciation for these Midwest cities, these smaller, maybe not the top major cities anymore, of which Detroit would be considered now, like probably a second tier city in terms of population and regional impact. So a lot of these folks want to venture into that market.
Right.
Whereby, you go to Chicago, everything's saturated. LA, everything's saturated. Brooklyn, New York, everything's saturated. But you can still go into the Columbuses and the Indianapolises and the Minneapolises and the Detroits and the Clevelands and find opportunity. And we're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah.
By a lot of folks who are they might be in Cincy.
Right.
They're definitely in Indianapolis. I mean, they're definitely in Columbus.
Right.
And, they're definitely venturing north now into some of these northern cities that they see to be somewhat sister cities in many other indicators.
Yeah, they found success in
Right.
some of those other ones and
Right.
are bringing that here. But it does go beyond a business decision for so many. There's a real passion for Detroit that I haven't seen in years, and it's amazing.
Yeah, we're really seeing it a lot in the national retail, but we're also seeing it a lot in restaurants.
Right.
And we're seeing it when I say national retail, I mean boutique retail primarily, although some is actually just straight up major national retailers looking at smaller footprints. But we're also seeing it in just really interesting projects that people have done in other sometimes just completely dissimilar markets, but they still have a passion for wanting to be in Detroit. Just met recently with a group that built a project in London and one in South Africa, and they thought about maybe we'll go, the obvious answers were LA, Miami, New York.
Right.
One of them said, why aren't we going to Detroit? And so they're planning on making a major investment here. But that is not anymore an unusual conversation.
Right.
I mean, that is relatively frequent And then I think you've got a lot of folks that from some of the southern cities, the Nashvilles, the LAs, that, where they have a pretty robust music scene. Detroit's sort of being re-explored somewhat. That's sort of being led by Jack White and his re-interest and reinvestment back into the city. People all follow other people. And
Sure.
and a lot of the people that I'm seeing now that are coming back and want to make investments, like they're major national players in their industries. But they came from Detroit, not necessarily the city, the suburban communities as well. Doesn't matter. It's all one Detroit as far as I'm concerned. And a lot of these people now are coming back like with other friends that left, but they're still all working together or have some relationships or connections to each other. Lots of those kinds of groups that are trying to find property, and they all want interesting property. And luckily, Detroit, because we had so much vacancy, has been able to parlay a lot of these and reposition a lot of these properties because we've had that inventory. Midtown, we don't have a whole lot of vacant buildings left, but there's always some churn in the market. The vacant ones that are still there have been purchased for redevelopment, but for the most part. But there's always new ones coming on, and there's always the speculators out there that are just determining when they're going to cash out.
Sure.
But it's still a dynamic market where people can find opportunities.
It is. You hit on a couple of things that I think are interesting, and one of them I think is a change that we've seen throughout all of Michigan is that you spoke of the topic of one Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
And years ago there was that great divide, the suburbs and the city, and that was a feeling that that kind of permeated the different areas. But now there's a love of both, and there's a recognition that you need both the suburbs and the city to make the city work, to make the suburbs work. It all goes hand in hand, which is a philosophy that our politicians seem to have embraced, that our local business leaders have embraced. So I think that's exciting to see, and it's a real change in what you would have said a decade ago even. It was
Right, I mean,
very different.
regionalism was never really in play here.
No, it was not.
And I mean, the fact that Kobo is now a regional asset, the fact that the water system is more regionally run, I mean, all of these things are critical.
And then the other thing you mentioned that I think is really interesting, you have a lot of expatriates, former Detroiters that
Lots.
you run into in other markets, and they're excited to come back, bring their businesses with them. I think we're just starting to see that in a major way. It's been a trickle effect for a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the floodgates are opening on that now, which is exciting. As I go to our other cities throughout the Midwest, there used to be an apprehension, oh, you're from Detroit,
Right.
and there was an apprehension to that. Now, people do not ever stop talking about our city, and I'll be in major cities like Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
where that's a world-class city,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone I talk to there can't wait to talk to me about all the great
Right,
things
I think
going
there's
on.
a tremendous amount of just curiosity
There is.
about, I'm reading a lot about Detroit, I'm hearing a lot about Detroit, what's really going on in Detroit.
Right.
And, I had a guy, one of these folks that's just a really phenomenal national industry exec that he said to me when he came into town, I came to, or when I grew up here, I mean, I always said I wasn't going to be one of those people that was going to pretty much write off Detroit, but after so many years, I pretty much did.
Mm.
And he just never thought Detroit was ever going to turn around. And he said then he came back like a year ago and he could not believe it.
Yeah.
And he said not only did he believe it, but it's actually had happened. And I mean that made all the difference.
Absolutely.
Is people coming back and actually sort of getting involved and seeing what's going on and talking to people and visiting places and sort of getting absorbed in it and and I think just talking to a lot of people here because there is a different energy and there is a different conversation that happens I think in Detroit today. So but I mean that sort of sums up I think where a lot of people are at. I'm sure there's others that come in and are still like, this still isn't a mature enough environment for me to make an investment yet, and that's okay too.
Sure.
Everybody's got a different kind of interest in terms of when they want to land in a city, whether as a resident. And some people are like, hey, the city maybe still doesn't have all the amenities I need, but you know what? I'm getting a great house for a fourth of what I'd have to pay in other markets, and it's a beautiful place. And I believe that over time that those amenities will come in. So, I mean, everybody's got a different, I think, take on what's happening here.
Right.
But there certainly is a huge amount of people that are trying to figure out a way to become involved.
No, absolutely. Sue, there's a lot going on, obviously, in Midtown and the city. If people want to invest, if they want to get active in Midtown, what's the best way to do that? How would they go about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, our office has a ton of resources available for people. If you have a client that is interested, if you're an aspiring entrepreneur looking for a space or for some even technical assistance, we can direct you to free, really great programs that are operating both at Techtown and the Build Institute and all kinds of places in Detroit. If you're interested in finding a place to live or just knowing what's coming online, I mean, what new restaurants are in the neighborhood, you can call us at our office at 313-420-6000. You're always welcome to email me at susanmosey@gmail.com. And I'm more than happy to, respond or give you information or point you to wherever in our team that can help you find an investment opportunity.
And you have a great website. I love, I go on there all the time when I'm looking for a new restaurant or somewhere to go in the city. What is your website address for people who want to jump on there?
Yeah, midtowndetroit.org.
That's fantastic.
And we also, put out an e-newsletter, usually covering all the new businesses coming to town, any new programs, workshops, anything that's really of interest to a lot of folks. And if people let us know if you're interested in us adding you to our email list so that you would get only our newsletters. We do not send anything else. Every couple months we do a newsletter and we try to get the word out on the sort of the essential things that are going on in the neighborhood, and we're happy to do that as well.
That's great. We really appreciate the fact that you made time for us today. I know I like to think I keep busy in my work life, but I can't even keep pace with you, Sue. You are one of the most active, caring people in the community. Very fortunate to have you on our show. Really appreciate that. Once again, this is Andy Gutman for Real Estate of Mind. Keep listening. Join us next time for another wonderful edition of Real Estate of Mind, a Farbman Group podcast.